So, Jamilla, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for asking me.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's great to have you on. So, could you just kick us off by telling us a bit about your background and what you do today?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I have a background throughout my childhood of just dance in general. And then as a young adult, I was looking for something a little bit different. So I ended up starting my aerial training. So I went trapeze, corde lisse, which is the rope, and then silks, which is also known as tissue. And then from there, I found pole. And basically from there, I was very drawn to that apparatus. I made it my specialty, and I've been on pole now for 20 years. So I'm coaching, I perform. I'm a former Australian champion. And yeah, now I live in Las Vegas, Nevada.
That's epic. That's epic because I came across you on Instagram and like, aside from the whole, the sort of dance side of pole, there is an incredible athletic element in there. I mean, it's just like you're watching gymnastics in action, and I mean, it's an art form, and I'm sure you'll tell us more about this, but from that, I mean, I've had questions from some of our listeners talking about, is that your only training? Are you just doing pole dancing, or are you also doing things like exercise in the gym?
Yeah, about let me see, about 7 or 8 years ago, I discovered CrossFit, and that became my cross training. And so it's I'm hugely passionate about CrossFit as well, or just generally cross training, strength training on top of what I do. Because as you become a specialist, especially in these aerial apparatuses, you're missing areas, like we don't use our lower body as much, and certainly not like we're not on the ground, obviously. So it's all about the upper body. So there's definitely muscle groups that we're missing. So when I found CrossFit, it enabled me to fill out all those, missing areas and become a much more holistic athlete. So that's my jam. Everyone has their own, but that's what it is for me.
So most of the pole dancing stuff, it's mostly grip based stuff. It's just like grip, it's biceps, it's back, it's core to keep those sort of rigid positions. And then if you kept training in that way, would you never get to the level that you would to be able to get those positions, or you need to actively be training in the gym? You need to be adding things like CrossFit or other styles of sort of gymnastics.
I don't think you necessarily need to. I know a lot of very, very high level aerialists who just avoid any kind of weight training. Everything that they do is body weight. But I think it helps avoid injury for one, because if you have weaknesses, especially in your hips, it's the center of everything. You can over time develop quite major weaknesses, especially with those external glutes, to where you start to get different hip pain because you're putting the wrong pressure on your hips. So I think it actually makes you generally a more fit and healthy being,
Mm,
but you
mm,
don't need it to get to that high level.
mm. It's like everything, isn't it, in life? Like those there's sort of a baseline of strength that you need in your body just to be doing everyday stuff, and doing that in the gym just means you can target those areas better, and you're just kind of like your glutes, your hips, your hamstrings, or your whole posterior chain that never doesn't really get worked in day-to-day life. So what are your go-to exercises for to balance out all your pole work with those muscular imbalances?
Well, I love the barbell. So my go-to, if I just walk in the gym, I'm like, I've just got like an hour. What am I going to do? Back squats will be my first choice.
Fuck yeah.
Absolutely. Love my back squat. I love deadlift too. So it'll be either back squat or deadlift. But I think I do back squat because I find the back squat more challenging
Yeah.
for me. Like I feel like I'm engaging a little bit more with the back
Yeah.
squat.
And are you going like strength reps levels, so like low reps for more sets, or what's your actual programming on there? Or
My
you got a
go-to is a
CrossFit
five by
coach who's
five.
just telling you to what to do?
No, actually, one of the gyms that I've been at here in Vegas, it's closed now, unfortunately, but it was run by Zach Forrest, who's an ex-Navy SEAL, an ex CrossFit Games athlete, so very, very high level. He ran his gym just at that, extra high standard in terms of his athletes and his coaches. And so I actually ended up training with him as a coach. which I was really, really
Oh, well.
grateful for because he scared the crap out of me. And he was always pushing me,
Those are the
and he
best
taught me a
coaches.
lot. Right, exactly. So I feel like I've taken what I've learned there and now I can apply it to what I'm teaching in pole as well. But I learned a lot about, I did my CrossFit level 1 as well. So there's a certain amount that they will teach you there about programming on top of what I was learning with Zach and looking at everything from the perspective of a coach. So now I wouldn't say that I'm ready to, I don't do like complicated programs for myself, but I do know enough to know like what's effective in that moment.
Mm.
So 5x5 for me works pretty well.
Mm.
I find that pretty challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, I guess you've been doing the like dance in some form or another and training for a long, long time now. So that's where you start to understand your body and understand what your body needs. I read somewhere, it was either I read or you were doing another interview and it was talking about the importance of getting started with flexibility training as quickly as
Mhm.
possible. And what sort of flexibility training are you doing?
Well, I teach flexibility in 2 different studios right now, and then I have online clients as well that I do flexibility training with. So I've been exposed to an incredible amount of talented coaches, a bunch of whom we're teaching flexibility. So I've had that background being in circus basically for many years. It's flexibility is an integral part of circus training. Um, So I guess that mostly what I'm teaching is general fitness.
Mm.
For myself, I push it further. But with most people, they just need to be able to like balance out their hips, start to get some decent mobility, get some healthy mobility in the shoulders where you have
Mm.
a good, clean range of motion without pain. But then for myself, I'm pushing myself a little bit further because a lot of the movements that I'm doing are quite demanding. And if you don't have the flexibility for them, you can easily
Mm.
injure yourself.
I mean, I think it's important to differentiate between like the regular mindset of what flexibility is, which a lot of people would just liken that to just stretching. Whereas there's so much
Mhm.
more than stretching to flexibility work, sort of
Mhm.
actual breaking down of tissue, working to greater ranges, working strength from that extra range that you've got. So what is the most lacking in many beginners sort of thought process and when they're first getting into the sport in terms of their flexibility and their strength, in terms of how they apply that work? So like do they generally lack flexibility in the wrists or the arms, or the grip strength is not good enough generally? What are the limiting factors with most people?
Grip strength, definitely. That's just something that you have to get through experience and training. But I often find with beginners, and they all come to me with different levels of background. Some of them have a gymnastic background, some have not really anything at all. But quite often, beginners will have definitely not only a lack of mobility through the hips and shoulders, but it's a lack of body awareness. So I'm demonstrating an exercise, let's say in the warm up, and I'm watching the students behind me to see what they're doing. And I can see that they can't even replicate, the basic movement because they've never really had to have that level of awareness of what their body's doing and what planes of motion that they're moving in. So that's definitely something that I'm training my students in. Um, Little fine details, like as I start to get more advanced with students, I'm teaching them something like a split. There's a little bit of external rotation that you need to be able to control through the hip, and it has to come from the top of the hip, not from the knee, and obviously not from the ankle. And I just love seeing those light bulbs go on when I
Mm.
just give them a little cue, and I'm like, just rotate that just a little bit out towards my hand. And then suddenly they had that feeling of being stuck before then, and all of a sudden their leg just sits in the right place
Mm.
and their face lights up. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the importance of having a coach there, isn't it? Because without the coach, then you're sort of shouting into the wind. You've got all the motivation, you've got all this energy to put into it, but you need a coach like yourself, or if you're doing CrossFit, a CrossFit coach to actually put you in the right position.
That's right. Yeah, it's very important actually. There's a lot that can go wrong or a lot of time you can waste if you're trying to train yourself, but you don't really know what those details are of what you're supposed to be doing.
Mm.
A coach can really speed up that training process.
Mm. And how are you balancing all the volume of this stuff? Because if you're doing lots of pole sessions as well as strength sessions, as well as, I mean, I don't know if you do any cardio, or I guess the pole work is probably enough cardio, but how are you balancing all these sessions and sort of not getting injured?
That's the million-dollar question. I've had to address that. It's really gotten in my face because there was a time when I was doing so much CrossFit and training and coaching at the same time, that I pretty much burned myself out for a period of time. Um, because the strength, you're telling your body to respond in a certain way, like to brace, for example, and then with the pole, I'm oversplitting and I'm telling my hip to go way beyond its normal, usual range of motion. And what for me, I ended up getting little chronic injuries, like a little annoying pain in my hip that
Mm,
started to happen even when I was just walking, things like that. And I had to sit down and think, all right, what am I doing? And it's just your muscles are working so differently under load as
mm,
opposed to in the air and elongating itself.
mm,
Two completely different types of movements. So in the end, for me, the balance was backing off on the extremes of the strength.
mm.
So whereas I was pushing for a PR, like, all good CrossFit athletes go to the gym and try to get your PR for the
Yeah.
day. I got to a point of making peace with that where I don't, it's not a priority for me anymore to hit that PR. What I want to do is just to create enough of a reaction in my body, enough of a response, stimulus, that I'm building holistic strength. So I'm creating healthy hips and
Mm,
strong legs as opposed to the strongest legs that I could possibly create. So then
yeah.
when I go to the studio later on and I'm doing my splits and all the other things that I'm doing, I'm not hurting myself.
Mm. Yeah, because that's the thing, isn't it? It's like it's the ego wants to just lift more weight and be like, yeah, I've hit another PR. But then if you think about the carryover, if
Yeah.
you're doing the strength training in order to get better at something, whether that be pole or gymnastics or like another sport, then the likelihood of your body having to hit the position and carry the strength that is, a slow back squat at 100 kilos or 150 kilos, it's just very, very unlikely. But all you're
Hmm.
doing is you're giving yourself better tools to work into the better positions and have better stamina in your chosen sport. So it's very difficult.
Exactly.
It's difficult not to be chasing PRs. I totally get that. I mean, I've done it a lot recently and it only leads to more injuries.
Absolutely, 100%. And also, you have that CrossFit community around you, and the rest of the people there, they just work their day job behind a
Mm.
desk or whatever they're doing. And so that is their workout. And so they're all chasing the PRs. And it's that influence, you can feel the energy around you, and you're like, oh, here's me with just my couple of plates on the bar.
Yeah,
So you really have to make peace with that.
definitely. And like, and when you're working in a, because my background is all kind of strength, and there was a time when I was playing a lot of sport, and then it became more focused on just strength. And in a strength training program, at the start, for the first 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, you might only be working at 70% of your maximum, and then you start looking around, you're going, oh, don't worry, I can lift more than this. I can lift more than this. So, stop judging me on the amount of weight on the bar. But, that's the exact wrong mindset to go from. It's like, you're only against yourself here. You're not trying to
Mhm.
beat everyone in the gym because you're only going to lose then. No one's actually looking at you. Everyone's just getting on with their own shit anyway.
100%. No one really cares. In the end, it's just what are you doing and, surviving through your sets.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk to you a little bit about more your evolution and how you got into pole, because pole has become very popular in the last, I want to say 5 to 10 years, and it's become much more mainstream as a vessel for women getting fit and guys as well, but much more popular with women. So what has been your evolution into the sport? Did you ever dance in clubs, or did you go straight into just as a tool for fitness?
I did. That's how I found pole because back when I found pole, you couldn't find it anywhere except in a club.
Mm,
So I had about 5 years of aerial training behind me. So I built up enough strength to, lift myself up in the air and turn upside down and things like that. And I did end up daring myself to walk into a club. This is in Australia.
yeah.
And the club, the rules in that, or the laws, let's say, in that state were very restrictive. So there's no such thing as lap dancing. and there's a, big beefy security guards everywhere and cameras and a lot of rules that protected the girls. So I was like, and all of the girls had ankle length evening gowns on, and it was aimed at a kind of a more upmarket crowd.
Mm.
And the manageress was a woman as well. So I was like, okay. So I ended up, I did dance there for a few years. I'm not a very good hustler, I'm about to say.
Got to
Sales
be
is
a
not my
hustler in those
forte.
clubs.
You got to be a hustler. It's actually mostly a psychological job. It's very interesting once you go into that arena and you kind of
Mm.
work out how it all works. It's really a psychological job. It's more about psychoanalyzing people. It's about talking. It's like sales, You
Yeah.
just got to recognize who it is that you're talking to, and you have to not take no for an answer. And so it's a lot more about that than it is like the look or how you're dancing or what you're doing on the pole or anything like that. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm very good. I'm a great performer. I love performing. I love being on stage, and so I realized that pretty quickly, and I just started honing myself in that direction. And I would come into the club when it was closed just to train on the pole.
Oh, wow.
And I made that into my specialty. So it kind of that was my thing for standing out on
Mm.
stage. And there was another girl who was doing the same thing, and we were sort of eyeing each other off, like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Because most of the girls, they want to sleep all day. They don't want to come into the club and train.
Mm.
And we ended up together creating Sydney's first pole dancing school,
Oh,
separate
wow.
from clubs and everything. So we were the ones that made it accessible to other people.
And what did you find like in stepping into an environment like that? Because it's got an image, of kind of a different, seedier underworld, the kind of that pole world. So, I mean, was it intimidating, or what were your first thoughts when you went into that realm?
It was very intimidating for me because I was completely unfamiliar with that type of world. And it took a while. Well, I mean, I never really got used to it because, like I said, it just didn't gel very well with me. Like I don't drink.
Mm.
So I was, it's a very heavy alcohol environment. And yeah, it's a crazy world. I literally, my first shift, I remember just like, you're on stage, off you go. And I didn't know what I was doing. Like I learned everything that I know on the fly, like
Wow.
literally just on stage working it out. So that was interesting, but it was a bit intimidating.
Yeah, yeah, I bet. I mean, and in terms of like the guys that are in there, because you're presumably during that time once you started, it became more of what I'm hearing is it became more of an art for you over time. And so was there a point
Mhm.
where you thought,
Yeah.
I need to do this in a in a bigger environment, which is not surrounded, but I guess just drunk guys being creepy. That's the kind of mindset that I have
Mhm.
about it. So like, was there a point where you had kind of
Yeah.
enough of that environment and you said, right, I want to take this to a mainstream? Because you sound like you're one of the pioneers of bringing this mainstream.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I got over it pretty quickly, to be honest, because I don't know if I'm sure like when you're sober in an alcohol environment,
Yeah.
like you do get over that pretty
Mm.
quickly because everyone's just being silly and you're like, really? Um, I remember starting to get very angry, like just walking in the club before I'd even started my shift. I would just walk into that environment. I could feel the anger coming up inside me. I was like, it's just such a horror, like in many ways, just
Mm.
drunk people don't tend to treat dancing girls like real human beings. They treat you like a cardboard cutout, like, no, I'll take the blonde over there.
Yeah.
It's very shallow kind of world. So I feel myself getting angry, and I had that self-awareness to where I was like, oh, I'm getting angry right now. Like no one said anything to me. This is just my reaction to being in this environment. I have to take myself out of it. And very fortuitously at the same time, the girl that I said that we both trained in there together, she and her husband, because he was a businessman, had the concept of creating a studio separate
Mm.
from the clubs and everything and just seeing what happened. We didn't know how it would work. And so at the same time as I was really over it and was ready for something new, the studio happened. And then from the studio, they created Miss Pole Dance Australia, which was Australia's first and still its biggest pole dance competition
Mm.
championship. And I won. So that also then like that took me to the next level. And then I kind of branched out and I started creating DVDs, instructional DVDs for pole,
Yeah.
because I realized there was a lack of that. There's a lot of
Mm.
people in the industry who were very excited about pole, but didn't necessarily have a fitness background or any particular background. And I wanted to inject some good information. So I created these DVDs and they went worldwide. That was around
Wow.
2007. We
And
started producing
that's called
them.
The Art of the
Yeah.
Pole, right? The Art of Pole, right?
The Art of Pole. That's
The
right.
Art of Pole. That's it. That's it. Okay.
Hmm.
And so what was the reception from there? They were obviously very popular.
It was fantastic. I think to this day, it's still the best-selling series in the world in pole.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and it gave me an introduction to the world because, you know, internet, Facebook, and all that was kind of just like being born around that time, I guess. It was still very new. And the DVDs, they were actual physical, you know, DVDs at that time, we were sending them all over the world. And then all of a sudden, I had like a window to all these different
Mm.
countries. And then I started touring and touring workshops.
And the reception was mostly from girls who were already in the pole dancing industry who wanted to get better, or this was girls who saw it and thought, wow, that looks really cool, or that looks really sexy, you know, I want to do that, I want to go into that world.
Actually, like to this day, I think there is, for people who've never really been exposed to the ins and outs of our world, that's a big assumption that people make about pole is that people who come to learn pole are girls in clubs who want to get better and make more money.
Mm.
And the interesting thing about that is if you want to make money in a club, you have to be, like I said, talking. It's all about talking and connecting with people, actually. And also, um, not to be too crass, but you make your money really on the stage floor,
Mm.
close to the client who's going to be tipping you. You know,
Yeah,
if you're far away from them doing acrobatics on a pole, like it's kind of interesting, but it doesn't actually make money.
it doesn't get the
It's
tips.
very interesting. That's right. So yeah, typically the people who come to classes are regular people who are looking for a way to get fit, but they're not really into the gym because the gym for them is very monotonous.
Mm.
Even though I personally do love the gym, I love being in the gym whenever I get the chance. But yeah, a lot of people want to do something. They want to get fit. They want to be in touch with their body and have that body awareness and increase their strength and flexibility, but they don't want to do it in a kind of a gym environment. They want it more of a creative environment.
Mm.
Yeah.
So what's the sort of step one, step two, step three of actually getting into pole? Because if you don't have the strength in your arms, presumably you can't even do many of the basic moves. So how are you even initiating people into this sport?
That's a great question. A lot of people come to their first class very intimidated and, you know, concerned that they're not going to be able to do anything because they've seen, you know, high level pole. But what I teach when I teach my beginners, my first timers, is spinning forwards on the ground, spinning backwards. We put all that together into a little sequence, and then I teach how to sit on the pole and how to climb. And the climbing usually on the first class involves one step off the ground. It's like just getting, you know, the position of the legs, what muscles you're engaging, getting to the point where you're standing up off the ground, and coming back down again.
Mm. So it's almost like the like almost a pull up, or is there like there's sort of a minimum requirement to be able to do a pull up, right?
No, not at all. The way that we climb on the pole, because you got to remember, this is a sport primarily designed for women, and women don't come to their first class being able to do a pull up unless
Yeah.
they've already trained that.
Mm.
So the way that we engage our legs on the pole, we're actually using our hips to drive ourselves up. It's kind of like jumping, but not
Okay.
jumping. And you are hanging from your arms, but your arms are not really pulling.
Okay.
You're just
Okay.
holding. Yeah.
And that sounds quite painful on the hips and the inner thigh, if I'm thinking about it.
It's well, the connection for a climb is from the knee to the foot
Mm.
only. So
Okay.
yes, it can be painful because I mean any skin touching the pole can be painful because this is a piece of stainless steel. It's unforgiving, you
Mm.
know.
Mm.
And the bone in the lower legs, that shin bone, is very close to the surface of the skin, and the foot as well. So there is bruising quite commonly with our beginners because they don't know how much force to bring
Mm.
their body to the pole with. Whereas once you get stronger, you place your body on the pole, so you're not, you know, slamming everything.
Mm.
But yeah, the skin can be a bit sensitive the first time.
Do people come back after their first try? Are they hooked, or are they a bit more intimidated than they thought it was going to be?
I think that will depend a lot on what kind of experience they have the first time. And I can say for my classes, I make it as least intimidating as possible
Mm.
because I know I've worked with a lot of beginners for many years, obviously, and I see the intimidation in their faces when they come. And what I want for them is to see that there is a way through. Like there's always a way. It's like with CrossFit, I learned the same thing. Like you can have a class full of people and you can have a modification for every single person to where, you know, a pregnant woman can safely work out, an older generation person can safely work out alongside the, you know, high level athlete and everything else, because there's
Mm.
a way for everybody to get there. And so that's my passion, is finding a way for everybody. So I just keep it really simple. I always tell my students there's no need to get off the ground at all on your first class, but I'm going to show you ways that you can engage your muscles and position your body to make it as possible as it can be.
Mm. Mm. That's interesting. And what's the sort of range of people you have in there? Are they mostly, is it mostly younger? Is it older? Is it men? Is it women? What sort of demographic are you working with?
Predominantly women. Yeah, we have mostly women. Occasionally we have a few guys who come in to take class, but I would say, you know, 95% are currently women. And the age range in my classes is going to be anything from, you know, early to mid 20s to, I have women in their 40s going into their 50s.
Mm. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it's a huge age range.
Yeah. And over time, have you noticed that either that's changed, or certainly that because there was, I want to say in the last, maybe it's just me, but certainly in the last 5 years, I've even seen like more pole dancing studios popping up, which would show to me that there's at least a reduction of the amount of stigma that was behind pole dancing, because pole dancing really
Mhm.
had that sort of sexualized stigma from, you know, what we were mentioning before. It was very popular in the clubs and everything like that. So what have you noticed in terms of like barriers, in terms of stigma and getting that word out?
In the States, definitely there's been more stigma than in places like Australia. Australia is very kind of a laid back kind of a country. Here, there's a lot more kind of conservative perspective, which is fine. I appreciate that too. But I think these days, well, I'm in Las Vegas, so maybe I'm not a good cross section of the general country. Las Vegas is its own little whole little world.
Well,
But there
what do
doesn't
you
seem to
mean?
be too much stigma
What do you
here.
mean by that for anyone who hasn't been to Vegas?
Well, Vegas is actually a lot more than what people think it is. We have this giant valley, right, surrounded by mountains, and right in the very middle, there's this little sliver of land, which is the Strip. And
Mm.
the Strip is all hotels and casinos, and that really is what our economy in Las Vegas is all about. There's a lot going on in a very small space of land. And then stretching beyond that for miles and miles, as far as you can see, is just regular people living their lives,
Mm.
but somehow we're all tied in to that activity on the Strip. So it's entertainment, it's all about pizzazz, you know,
Mm.
sex, drugs, rock and roll, all that kind of stuff. Like that's Las Vegas in the public perception,
Mm.
you know.
Because
But most of us live just normal lives. I live between the gym.
yeah, because
Sorry.
I've never been to Vegas,
You're,
and my brother has, and you know, it just has that the only view of Vegas that I have is that view of Vegas in the movies, you know, where it's just the Strip, it's just everyone going to party, it's everyone going to gamble. But like you're saying, there's this whole other world of, you know, everyone that keeps that show running, and like businesses that are just based there. So like it's very hard to
mhm,
imagine Vegas as anything other than a party town, but there must be
mhm.
like people just living regular lives.
A lot of people living regular lives and actually pretty quiet lives. Sometimes we describe Vegas as an overgrown country town.
Mm.
Yeah,
Why?
it's not quite LA.
Why? Because it's just like most people are just regular Joes and just living a quiet life, and then you've got this whole like, I mean, does that get frustrating? It's like a tourist town where you've just got people coming in, and maybe you're thinking like, just respect the town at least a little bit.
I mean, you have to kind of be ready to sacrifice all that if you move to Vegas, but it depends a lot what part of the city you're working in. So I don't ever have to go onto the Strip unless I'm actually going to see a show or something
Mm.
like that. So that's where the traffic is. That's where the drunken people are stumbling across the street at 2 a.m. and all
Mm.
that kind of stuff. Like it stays really within that district.
Yeah, yeah, because you know, like you mentioned earlier about being sober, but once you do quit drinking or doing anything, then that becomes very jarring seeing that face to face. I mean, I quit drugs and alcohol about 18 months ago now. And like, I still enjoy going to a bar if I'm with friends, other friends who aren't drinking. But once it gets past 10 p.m. and everyone starts getting sloppy drunk, I'm like, oh God, this is actually a bit boring now.
Oh, 100%. You should come to Vegas sometime just to take in like thousands of people
Yeah.
off their faces, gambling. They come here and they want to just let loose, from whatever restrictive life that they normally
Mm,
live. And it's like a giant playground.
yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, that's it. I mean, I'm living in Puerto Vallarta at the moment in Mexico, and that's just it's a holiday town. That's its main income is tourism. So you get Americans and Canadians, and I guess some English and some Australians, and a lot of Mexicans coming in and just getting absolutely smashed for a weekend, and going to
Hmm.
the clubs all along the beachfront and everything. And like in the day, it's a beautiful place, it's lovely, but in the night, it turns into that kind of darker twist of things where everyone's trying to sell you drugs on the street, and everyone's drunk, and everyone's sort of decorum goes out the window.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like that, but
Mm,
a lot more people probably.
mm. So if we take it back to the sports side of pole, I've had one of my friends has started doing pole dancing. She's been doing it for about 6 months, I think, to a year, and she was the one who initially sparked the question about, um, do you need to do strength training aside from the pole dancing? And as well, she had questions about gaining muscle, so not just on the strength side of things, but also in sort of nutrition side and what she needs to be eating and whether she should be eating sorts of carbohydrates. And what's your take on nutrition for a pole dancer?
I have had a long journey with nutrition from actually quite a dysfunctional relationship with food as a teenager, which I think a lot of teenage girls go through for a certain period, to what I feel like is a very, very healthy relationship with food now. And I'm so grateful that I've gotten to that point because it was a big deal for me when I was younger. And what I've come to now, I've had a few people really turn on light bulbs for me in the last, I would say, couple of years. One of them is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who's a protein specialist, let's say. She works out of New York and she has her own social media channels. And she really turned the light bulb on for me in terms of protein, which is the black sheep of the macronutrient family, I think is how she puts it. And because there's been a lot of, I want to say like food myths over the last few decades about red meat's bad for you, it's inflammatory, you should be eating salads, vegetables are much healthier.
Mm.
And I used to do that. I was even a vegetarian for a few years in my 20s.
Oh no.
And yeah, fortunately, I did it in my 20s because I survived it pretty unscathed. Like I
Yeah.
lost a lot of weight. I was
How,
I was
how long
pretty
how long did
thin
you do
at
that for?
3, 4 years
Oh
at
wow.
least.
Wow, you can do some damage in that time.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I literally had an eating disorder as a teenager as well,
Mm.
so that also would have done some damage. Um, and yeah, what I've come to now, really, I base my whole nutrition around protein. So, eggs for breakfast, usually red meat for dinner. And then I minimize vegetables,
Mm.
which is interesting because I used to base everything around vegetables, and
Yeah.
now I don't really eat very many at all, and I'm doing great.
Yeah. It's a fascinating thing, isn't it? It's so counter like regular knowledge that to minimize vegetables. I mean, sometimes I even think about it now and I'm like, am I really saying that? Because it's so drilled into you as a child and
Hmm.
growing up, and like you base your diet around vegetables. That's just like common knowledge. And now it's like, hang on, that's not that's not the best. So when did you start integrating that, and when did you
Yeah.
realize? Did you have like a bad episode with vegetarianism and then you were like, oh, I just craving meat, or how did the change come about?
I didn't, but I don't think I had that level of body awareness to really be connecting what I was eating with how I was feeling and how I was performing. Once I became a really high level athlete, I was already much more into the protein. Thank goodness, because I
Mm,
don't think I would have done as much as I've done if I wasn't eating that much protein. But since I moved to the States, so I've been here for almost 10 years, I remember at that time it was chicken. I thought chicken was the thing.
mm. Oh no.
Now I've changed my
Yeah.
mind again. But at least it was meat, at least
Yeah.
it was chicken and I was eating eggs. and taking, protein powders to supplement because I was doing a lot of workouts every day. So I really needed that extra. So it's really been, I would say the red meat thing has really been the last 3 or 4 years.
Mm. And what
Yeah.
sort of protein supplements do you take or did you take? Were you on animal-based supplements like whey, or you were on
Yeah.
like okay.
Yeah, it was whey.
Okay. Okay. And you're mentioning that you kind of had a dysfunctional relationship with food. Like, what was your
Hmm.
journey through that, and maybe anything that you would say to anyone who's growing up and maybe has a sort of a negative relationship with food at the moment?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think there's a lot more of it than we even realize. A lot of people are hiding, it's like their shameful secret is a dysfunctional relationship with food. And I think, well, for me anyway, I can speak from experience, it was very tied in with emotional issues that were going on at the time. So my parents were on those last few years before they actually divorced and split. So there was a lot of, bad energy
Mm,
in the home. There were we were 5 children all living in like a kind of a smallish home. So I think there was also that thing, just as I was kind of coming towards adulthood, I just didn't have personal space, or I was feeling kind of stifled. And so I developed this eating disorder. It was my shameful secret. I was hiding it from everybody. But of course, I think, in the end, everyone kind of worked out that there was something going on.
mm,
And I just had the good sense at a certain point to take myself to a counselor. I just did it. Well, actually, no, I think the thing that actually preempted it was I was with my friends one time, and they worked out, like they kind of confronted me and they said, something's going on, and I refused to talk about it, but it was enough to trigger me to realize there's something going on here and it's to do with me and I have to address it.
mm.
And so I didn't have my own car. One day I asked my mom if I could borrow her car, and she didn't even ask where I was going, bless her. She
Thank God.
said yes. Thanks, mom. Thanks, mom. And I just drove myself to this counselor, and I don't know anymore how many sessions I did, but
Mm,
I did enough time with this counselor to crack that ice, to crack that energy. And then the next thing that really helped me was that I moved out of my mom's house into my own, first adulthood shared accommodation
mm,
situation. And just having that space away from whatever was going on with my family just helped me to have a moment to breathe and make better choices.
mm.
And so, fortunately for me, I think it was only about a period of 2 years total that I was really in the depths of that. And then I let it go and never went back.
Well,
And then from then on, there's just been this natural journey of working out
mm,
how food can nourish, but also to lose the emotional attachment to it.
mm. Yeah. And so you had this kind of intervention with your friends. Is that because you had lost a lot of weight, or and you weren't looking healthy, or how did they know that there was something going on?
No, I think literally they caught me coming out of the bathroom.
Okay. Okay. And they were like,
Yeah.
intervention time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you ever drink alcohol, or you quit after a certain stage, or what's your relationship been with that?
Yeah. I had every young person's dysfunctional relationship with alcohol, which is, as some kind of underage person, I had older friends who were drinking and they're like, oh, here, try some, and then, pure blood, drink alcohol,
Yeah, you're gone.
inebriated. And yeah, so probably until I would say early 20s, I was actually traveling. I was in Europe, doing the Aussie dream of
Mm,
just leaving Australia and going to find out what's going on in the rest of the world. And just the lifestyle that I was living, there was not a whole lot of alcohol. There was some, but I just kind of lost interest in it, to be
mm.
honest. And I just let it go. And yeah, I'm really glad I did.
Yeah. Yeah. I think once people get that taste of what a sober life is like, and how much more you can get done, how much more you get engaged with life and even your own emotions and everything like that in between, then I think it's very hard to go back without. I mean, some people do go back and then they look back on the time that they had sober and think, oh God, that was so good when I was sober, blah, blah, blah. So I think,
Mhm.
it's a lot of things that I think more people should taste is like a long period of not drinking and not taking any, even smoking weed or any of that stuff that people see as not too bad. but I think
Yeah.
has, you know, really long-term effects on your psyche and your motivation and everything in between.
It really does. It's very damaging. All of those things are very damaging on a literal physical level, but then also on a kind of a vibrational level. You know, just your energy is different
Mm,
when you're imbibing any of those things. And not to mention, you know, the metabolic effects of drinking alcohol. You know, it can be quite detrimental.
100%. And you mentioned this lady, Gabrielle Lyon. And
Mhm.
what's her take on protein?
Oh my gosh, if you haven't yet watched her, you have to get her on your podcast. She's amazing.
I made a note.
Um, Oh my gosh, she's you know, you asked me before about what are my biggest inspirations, and she's definitely on that list.
Mm,
She's very driven, she's very passionate, and she knows how to express these main points that people need to know right now about protein in particular, along with all the science. She's done like 17 years of training. She's trained under one of the world's protein experts, Dr. Donald Layman,
mm,
and she just has so much to offer. She talks about her experience in geriatrics in her training. So as part of her medical training, she had to spend some years with people at the end of life, and she would be studying their, you know, biometric markers at the same time as talking to them. What's their story? And the thing that really hit home for her is if you don't address this lack of protein early on in life, you don't address your skeletal muscle, the health of your skeletal muscle, it becomes exponentially harder to do that when you're older or as you age. And literally aging is any time from when you stop growing. So it could be from in your early mid 20s, you know, 30. From then on, your body it's increasingly more difficult for your body to recognize protein and to respond to it in the same way. So
mm.
it's just basically harder to put on and maintain muscle.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is,
And
you know, in the end of life, that's just tragic.
mm, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I've been into some of the care homes and some of the care facilities that we have in the UK, and the nutrition there is just, you know, the more I think back to it, the more damaging I think it is. Sort of once you start atrophying, and you know, it's all based around breads and seeds and porridge and all of this stuff that's very low protein anyway. And you know, it's no wonder that many people atrophy very fast once they get to a certain age. And I just wonder, is she talking about bioavailability and the difference between plant protein and animal protein as well? Because that's a big issue that a lot of people don't understand, especially a lot of the vegetarian world and the vegan world that are seeing as protein when it's not actually the case.
100%. Yeah, she will talk about that too. That basically the protein in plants is bound in plant fiber, which is undigestible to us. So even if there is any small level of protein in those plant foods, we don't even know if our body's absorbing it at all because it may very well pass straight through because it's just so bound in that plant fiber.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And in terms of, so what are you having any vegetables, or are you strictly sort of carnivore?
I've never been, especially coming from my background, as I said, with my dysfunction with food, I've never tried to put myself in a box with limits, like you can't do this or you
Mm,
have to do that. I do what makes me feel good and nourishes me because my body's requirements are very high. I put out a lot of energy every day and come home exhausted at the end of every day. So I have to do only things that are going to feed that and, you know, make that better. So for me, I will definitely focus on the protein, like I said, but then with the vegetables, I will occasionally eat vegetables just as I feel like it.
mm.
Um, Sometimes there's going to be a bit of avocado. I went to Christmas and my friends who invited me to Christmas, I was like, what would you like me to bring? And they said a salad. I'm like,
No.
yay. So I'm filling the salad with cheese, you know,
Yeah, yeah, and
really
chopping
nice
up eggs
cheese.
in there.
Yeah. What else can I put in there? Sneak in some protein.
Yeah, steak salad.
So I don't exactly. That's what I was joking. I'm gonna bring a steak salad, just pieces of steak cut up in a bowl.
Yeah.
Um, let's all eat some salad. So I'll happily eat vegetables, but you know, I really notice the difference now if I eat vegetables as opposed to if I'm eating meat. It's that the meat, I can feel my body's like it feels good, it feels
Mm,
tight, it feels strong, and then I feel a bit fluffy if I eat vegetables. It's
yeah.
really interesting.
Mm. No, I'm the same. It's like one of those things, you notice the contrast when you take some time away from the vegetables and then you put them back in. And like there are some sort of low fiber vegetables that don't hit me too hard. Like sweet potatoes, is it okay? A little bit of sweet potatoes, okay, without the skin and everything. And like sauerkraut, I like, and a few other sort of and low sugar vegetables. But once I start putting in like the heavy white potatoes and start having, like porridge, like then I'm in a whole world of pain because I want to fall asleep and my stomach just feels bloated. But I only really noticed that because sometimes I would have the two together. I'd have potatoes with the steak and I'd have everything in between, so it's hard to know what was really causing me to feel heavy. And I used to think sometimes it was the steak that made me feel heavy, but it was actually putting loads of fiber with steak, and that will binds everything up. So it's all this experimentation stuff with food.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like it's flip-flop from what I used to think it was. It's completely the opposite.
It's crazy. So you mentioned some of your biggest inspirations there. Who are you? Who are the people that you really looked up to when you were coming through in your sporting career?
I think in terms of creative artistic inspiration, I mean, at the time, at the beginning, I was just exposed to kind of mainstream, um, like Madonna and the big stars that would have like all the dancers on stage, or Pink, she would have acrobats and aerialists on stage with her. So in general, I would say I was generally inspired creatively by, what I was already seeing. My tastes kind of go a little bit beyond pop as well. So like I love flamenco. So I would go and watch like live flamenco
Oh wow.
shows when they would come out. Oh, it's amazing. It's just it's so powerful and beautiful. And I actually tried to train flamenco for a year, and it's so technical. After a year, I still felt like a complete novice. Just that, the coordination of hands with feet
Yeah.
and the direction of your body is very, very specific.
That's
So
the one that you see with the big dresses as well, that with the sort of swirling dresses around. Like that's the image I have of flamenco.
yeah,
Wow.
That's it. I love it. And because it's very traditional too, it's very old. And it comes out of, generations and generations. So I love that stuff. So yeah, I've had a lot of different, creative inspirations. And then just in terms of like being a human and just, following your purpose and things like that, I just love people who just stepped away from what everyone else is doing because they're pursuing something that they know to be true, and they're boldly following that, like Gabrielle Lyon that we've already mentioned is a great example of that. She put 17 years into her training, and she's come out speaking out against pretty much all of the mainstream food corporations, that are all telling you like eat the plants, eat the crickets, and all that kind of stuff. And she's really speaking out, and she's made a huge difference for me, and I'm sure she's done the same thing for thousands of people. And then you have people like Andy Frisella, and he has a podcast. He runs First Form, which is based in Missouri here in the US. And he's literally a guy, he's just a regular guy, came from just, regular life. He had a good upbringing, I have to say. I mean, I've listened to him, and he's talking about the way that his father taught him well, in life in general. And he's built this massive business, and it's just growing all the time. He's reached out and helped a lot of people. So First Form is a supplement company. He's reached out and brought a lot of athletes on board with the business, and his vision is to grow everybody, just not to grow himself and just be like the guy, but to use his business as a way of improving the world in general by giving people opportunities and inspiring people.
Yeah. So that's his main company. It's a supplements company.
So far as I know, yeah.
And do you take any other supplements other than protein?
I take creatine every day. I take a scoop of glutamine for gut health.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it in terms of supplements. The cool thing with pole is I don't think you're going to have like steroid type issues, even though we're like a sport, because it's not about how big you are. It's about how you can functionally use your body. So you don't want to get too big,
Yeah, true. Well, I don't know, you say that. I mean, there's plenty of the gymnasts at the Olympics, I'm sure, are on steroids, like, who are just doing like tumbles and who are just doing like horse stuff, because a lot of it is around recovery. I guess like any of this sport, it's how quick you can recover
Right.
in order to get back to training again. And there's a great video on Instagram that I saw, and it's a guy. I mean, this guy is absolutely jacked. He's like 100% on steroids. And someone asked him like, "Hey mate, are you natural or not?" And he says, "Yeah, right now I'm natural." And he's like, "What do you mean right now?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I stopped my last cycle a week ago." And it's like, so like, you know, there are people who will be training in all of these different sports, and they will stop, and then you can still get tested, and it will come up as natural. But then like people are juiced up to their eyes. But no, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that there are sports out there still that are not absolutely caked with people with steroids. But the more elitist it gets, the more likely it is to have people using steroids.
You know, that is true. And from what I understand of that whole like um supplement industry is I think there's a lot of like formulations now and a lot of like they know which ones can be disguised and how to disguise them and things like that. And they all do something different. So you've got like the basic roids that, you know, pump you up. But then I guess there's a lot of other ones that, as you say, they just give you faster recovery.
Yeah.
And, you know, in our industry, we don't have an off season. So I imagine like I don't compete anymore. But if you were a high level competitor, I could see how tempting that would be because you don't really have a period of the year when there's no competitions.
Well, this is the thing. And like, it's also becoming more like, again, the stigma behind even steroid use is becoming reduced because like there's so many bodybuilders are on steroids. Like, you know, case in point, Liver King, who's just come out now and said that he's on steroids after claiming that he wasn't, which was obvious to anyone who knows anything about fitness that obviously this guy is on a lot of steroids. But like it's becoming a lot more mainstream, especially with, you know, I was speaking to a doctor the other day, Dr. Tracy Gapin, and he was talking about we have a pandemic of low testosterone in men because lots of men don't train, and you know the quality of food is so bad, and like we've got estrogen in the tap water and all of these other things and plastics and everything, that testosterone replacement therapy is becoming like, you know, a necessity for a lot of men. But a lot of people don't understand the difference between testosterone replacement therapy and synthetic anabolic steroids. And but a lot of people will see, hey, he's on testosterone replacement therapy, that's steroids, I can take steroids. So like there's a lot of young kids who don't want to put the work in the gym, and they'll just, you know, going straight off, and after a couple of weeks they're on the steroids.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and the whole, you know, visual perception of what you're supposed to look like as an athlete too. You know, if everyone's taking it, it's going to change the body type that becomes the norm.
Exactly. And what's the level of because as I guess pole has gone from, you know, not being mainstream to encroaching into the mainstream and more competitions arising, what are the sort of is it prize money that people get, or is it contracts, or is it just coverage? What are people winning in these competitions?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not really familiar with particular prizes, so I'm assuming that what happens is you are sponsored to go to the next level in the competition. I don't know what they're actually awarding at the world level, if there are prizes or not. They're not well promoted if there are prizes, because I'm not aware of any. Yeah. I think a lot of it's to do with the title, having the title.
Okay. So what were the official title that you had in Australia? That was like a world title, or?
The title that I won was Miss Pole Dance Australia.
That's it.
And I was supposed to have been sponsored from there to go to the World Championship that year. Unfortunately, the World Championship at that time, because we were so close to the period of time when we were still coming out of strip clubs into mainstream, the gentleman who was running the World Championships was a shyster. I'm just going to put it that way. He was he was really not a very good person. He ran the championship in Amsterdam. He was excuse me, he was supposed to be providing a ticket for me to go to the Worlds, providing accommodation. And I won the championship in Australia in May. The Worlds was in November. And from May until about October, there was a back and forth of emails. I'm asking, what's the itinerary? Where's the tickets? He never provided any tickets. And at the last second, when I said to him, look, like, I'm not paying my own ticket, what's going on? He said, well, no, you have to pay your own ticket and I'll give you the money when you get here. And I was like, really?
Dodgy.
So very dodgy. I had another argument with him where he had sent the rules, and in the rules it said there's no striptease. And so I wrote back and I said, I just want to clarify what that means. Does that mean because it's a show, you know, you want to do something entertaining, can I wear a hat and
Mm.
take the hat off on stage or whatever? And he said, no, if you remove any item of clothing or costume whatsoever, it's regarded as striptease and you'll be disqualified. And silly me, I wrote back and suggested to him that because I was already a showgirl. And so I said, well, you want to sell tickets, you want it to be a nice, entertaining show. Don't you think it would be a great idea if you would allow things like a hat or gloves
Mm.
or
Mm.
a cape or whatever it is, and not, you know, that's obviously not like actually striptease. And he got very offended and literally like yelled back at me over email. And I got the
All
impression at
caps.
that point that this was not, this was not a reasonable person. And he
Yeah.
was refusing to send me any itinerary, proof of accommodation, tickets, or anything. And I realized at that point that that was not something that I wanted to do.
Man.
And to be honest with you, the organizers in Australia left me on my own with that. They didn't
Mm.
support me or try to do any of that intermediary stuff at all. And so I had to make the executive decision not to go to the Worlds. So I never went. And he
Wow.
ran the competition. And sure enough, all the girls who came from other places had to end up paying for their own tickets. They didn't get accommodation. There was a situation where he was chasing down one of the girls and she had to have a police escort to leave the
Oh, wow.
country. It was as bad as that. So it was, that's why I say the man was a shyster. Like he was really
Yeah.
not a good person. I'm glad that I made the decision not to go, but in the end, I never went to the Worlds.
Wow. And it's evolved from there. Presumably this guy is no longer
Oh,
no longer
he's
running this stuff.
for some reason he went quiet for a few years and he tried to resurface and run another event. And some of us, you know, original girls tried to warn everybody.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't listen. He did the same thing again. Now he's gone for good. He'll never come back, I hope. It was a long time ago. But now it's completely changed. You have
Mm.
some really, really amazing, hardworking, dedicated men and women who are running these events, and they're now really world-class events.
Mm.
They're very well run. Mm-hmm.
So what's the sort of calendar for this stuff? Because we'll wrap up. We're coming into time now. So how do people
Mm-hmm.
get more involved with in terms of the calendar of this stuff? What in terms of like national championships and then world championships? What's the sort of how does this stuff work?
So there are always going to be individual studios running their own little events. So if you have a local studio, you should check in with them and see what they're doing. Beyond that, you have events that will tour around. Like for example, in the US, you have the PSO, which is the Pole Sports Organization, and there's USPF. We get it wrong. The US Pole Sport Federation, USPSF. There you
Mm.
go. And I judge for them in the nationals. So I was just in Tucson with them a couple of months ago, judging the national championships, which included pole and aerial. And there was also a children's division. So I
Wow.
think as young as maybe 8 years old, beautiful little children who have their coach on stage with them, and it's like a gymnastics event
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And there's a whole, you know, formal, like there's a whole book of scoring that you have to study and learn. You have to do a judge's course. You've got to wear your blazer and all that kind of formal stuff.
Mm.
So it's very, very well run. So that one's in Tucson, and then the winners from that go to the Worlds. And so they've just been at the Worlds now in, I think, Italy
Oh,
at the
wow.
World Championships.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, I would just look up online. There's a few companies like Xpol US are affiliated with one of those competitions. And from there, you can, you know, if you go on social media, Instagram and so on, start searching, you're just going to be there for hours looking at, you know, everything that's available in our industry.
Mm. Fantastic. Jamilla, if anyone has is listening to this and has sparked a lot of interest, where can they find out more about you and where can they see more of you?
My website is jamilla.com.au, so it's still an Australian site. My most active site would be Instagram, so that's at Jamilla. And then the studio that I'm teaching at here in Vegas is Shine Alternative Fitness, which is a circus training facility. It's a beautiful world-class space, and that's in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Fantastic. Jamilla, thank you so much for coming on to talk to me today. It's been fascinating,
Thank you.
and I'm looking forward to seeing more in the future.
Thank you so much. It's been great talking with you.